So I'm a chemical oceanographer. And I see some eyes glazing over already, so I'm not going to talk very much about chemistry, but it is really exciting. Okay, and that's how I got involved in the whole question of oil pollution. So I'm sitting in our den at home in 2010, catching up on the news, when the news flashes across the TV screen about the Deepwater Horizon and the explosion and the loss of 11 lives, tragedy, and the ongoing blowout at the seafloor. And my reaction was, not again. And my mind went back 30 years to June of 1979, when the Ixtoc well blew out in the Bay of Campeche in the Gulf of Mexico, off the coast of Mexico. Scientists in the United States were really interested in what was going on in that spill, because in those days, in the 1970s, there were very intensive debates ongoing about offshore oil and gas, exploration, development, and production in US waters and the environmental risks associated with it. And I was one of those scientists involved in those debates. Ixtoc was a worst-case scenario come true. So you can imagine, if you will, 1,000 or so tons a day of oil and gas bubbling up from the seafloor. It may be hard to imagine. So those of you who have visited or have seen pictures of Old Faithful Geyser in Yellowstone National Park, think about this. Old Faithful erupts for several minutes and spews out hot water and vapor. And it does it periodically during the day. Now imagine Old Faithful every second, every hour, 24 hours a day for 10 months. That's the same as Ixtoc was, except it wasn't hot water and steam, it was oil and gas. So several months after the Ixtoc happened, oil and oil-water mixtures began to come ashore on the coast of Texas. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, known by its acronym NOAA, mobilized its team to get to the coast, along with other government agencies. And NOAA also canceled the scheduled research cruise of one of its larger research vessels, the Researcher, and mobilized the research crews to the well site. And I was invited to go along, actually to participate in some of the planning, because of my experience up to that time at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in studying, among other things, oil pollution. And I also had some at-sea experience as chief scientist. In addition to the Researcher, there was another ship contracted, the G.W. Pierce from Tracor Marine. It was a rig support vessel, and there were 2 laboratories, portable labs, bolted and chained down to the deck. And we needed the Pierce to go into the slick itself and get up close to the well site, while the Researcher ranged along the edge of the slick and further afield in the Gulf. The Researcher also had a helicopter platform on board. And it was a contracted pilot and helicopter and mechanic. On the cruise, there were several NOAA scientists, university scientists, consulting company scientists, 2 scientists from Mexico, a French colleague. It was a really great team effort. The Mexican government, though, had stipulated very clearly that we couldn't study anything except the fate of the oil. No studies of biological effects. It's their waters, and they could make that stipulation. So we left Miami on September 11th. We've been delayed by a hurricane. We headed down to the well site. And we're going to spend several days at the well site and then proceed along the Western Gulf. And finally, on 28 September, get into Galveston as our ending port. Right after we passed into the Gulf of Mexico, past the Yucatan, we scheduled our first helicopter flight. And since I had seen some oil spills from a distance and been up close in some cases, I was scheduled on the first flight. Along, for some reason, the captain wanted to go, and one of the officers, so they were in the back seats of the helicopter. So as I crossed the helicopter platform, heading over to the helicopter, I shouted over the spooling up jet, "This is going to be very interesting. This is the first time I've ever flown in a helicopter off a ship." And the deck officer turned to me and said, and shouted, "Yes, this is going to be really interesting. This is the first time we've had this helicopter platform on board and the first time we've ever launched a helicopter." That was not the answer I was hoping for, nor the answer I wanted to hear. And somewhat nervously, I climbed into the helicopter, buckled in really tight, put on the communications headphones. Glenn, our pilot, was very experienced. He lifted the helicopter up several feet, so the pontoons were several feet up above the deck. He side-slipped expertly over the water, and we were off, no worries. Soon the researcher disappeared over the horizon, and we headed for our target, which was a series of small islands just inside the Yucatan off the coast where we were going to sample beach sand. A while after the researcher disappeared over the horizon, we located the islands, we landed, and we sampled. And we took off and headed back toward the researcher. An unexpected headwind had come up. Glenn, the pilot, radioed to the researcher. No answer. We climbed higher. He radioed to the researcher again. No answer. We flew on for a little while, and then it became dusk, and it was getting darker. So Glenn said to me, "You handle the radio communications while I do the flying." I think he was trying to give me something else to think about, because I was beginning to wonder at that point, okay, when we run out of fuel, what's it going to be like to land in the Gulf, in the choppy seas, in the dark at night, in the middle of nowhere? So I still have vivid memories of this. Our call sign was 21 November. So I broadcast, "Researcher, researcher, this is 21 November. Do you copy? Over." Silence. And this continued on for maybe 30 or 40 minutes. And then after one of the overs, there was a silence type break in the static in the background on the headphones. And I looked quickly at Glenn, and he nodded like this. And so I broadcast, "Researcher, researcher, 21 November, if you copy, please turn on your searchlights." And soon on the horizon, off to our left, the left of our flight path, were two stabs of light. And we flew towards them. The researcher emerged in outline form. Glenn pulled up alongside the ship and side-slipped in and landed perfectly. There were sighs of relief all around, not only on the helicopter, but on the ship too. It's a good thing we solved the problems of communications the next day, because we needed that helicopter for flying and giving us an overview of a very dynamic situation. And let me describe for you just my view of what it looked like from several helicopter flights. There was a circle of flame about 150 meters across, of the burning gas at the surface. The flames are leaping 10 to 20 feet into the air. This was surrounded by a roiling circle about 1,200 feet across of oil-water mixture at the surface. And then extending away down current, a slick, miles and miles into the distance, widening out as it went. And it was a dynamic situation. I can't go into the details, but while we were there, we were visited by Tropical Storm Henri, which soon became a hurricane after it passed by. The slick and the currents, well, the currents first, obviously, and then the slick turned direction 90 degrees one way and then 90 degrees the other way. And we persevered. We obtained about more than 1,000 samples of various types. In fact, we kept the chief survey technician on the NOAA ship busy about 12 hours a day just recording the samples from the cruise for the entire cruise we were out there. A few analyses were done on the ship. Some experiments were done on the ship. But most of the analyses were done when we got back to the laboratories on shore with the various groups of people. A tremendous team effort. And as the months went on, the results emerged, and there were some really exciting results and some really important questions that came out of that. Unfortunately, the leadership in Washington at that time decided that funding was over with. I was pretty frustrated and disappointed, as were many of the scientists involved. But I'd seen this happen before. Once the oil spill is contained or stopped, political pressure drops off, the funding dries up, everybody seems to forget about it until the next major spill, at which point we all wish we had those answers to the questions that we had raised in the previous studies. However, we did have a major conference in June of 1980 at which the various groups presented their papers. And then NOAA gathered these papers together in a technical report, which is still available actually on the NOAA website for those who might be interested. See me afterwards. A few scientific papers were published. So, Farrington, was this all worthwhile? And my answer is yes. That report informed the 1985 Oil in the Sea Review by the National Academies. In addition, in various ways, it informed the response to the Gulf War oil spill. I've been asked many times, okay, after all of this effort and so forth, do you think that the facts about oil pollution are getting through to the elected and appointed officials of the government and to the general public? And my answer is yes, for the most part. It's taken a tremendous effort by a few scientists, several of us taking advantage of a number of different communications tools. For example, invited testimony before Congress, presentations to the public, to classrooms, interactions with the media, websites now, story colliders. They all work collectively, but there's an important part of it. They always need to be updated and they need constant attention. Frequent updates, patience, and persistence. I'm going to close with what I think is an important message in this day and age for our present times. Mentors early in my career, by example and by advice, told me and instructed me about the importance of speaking with government officials, discussing science with various sectors of our society. I'm going to continue to do so. And I'm going to continue to encourage my colleagues and other scientists to do so, especially those in the academic sector. It's our obligation. There are rewards, and I'll leave you with one of my favorites. Several years ago, I visited a science fair in our local town. I approached a poster that had been put together by a 5th and 6th grade class. And they were all gathered around very proudly their poster, and I walked up to them, and it was about oil pollution in the ocean. And so I asked them for a presentation, and they made a great presentation. They were so enthusiastic. They were so well educated about that for 5th and 6th graders. My reward. I walked away with a smile on my face and a warm feeling in my heart. Thank you.